Good morning, everyone. My name is Eileen Sandberg. I'm from the Federation for Children with Special Needs. And joining me today as panelists are my colleague Mary Beth Landy and Colleen Pertoni from the Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. Today we're going to talk about coping with children's anxieties, and we'll cope with some of our own while we're at it. Let's see. Colleen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, sure. Good morning, everybody. This is Colleen from the Commission on Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. I just want to say a huge thank you to Eileen and Mary Beth from the Federation for Children with Special Needs. This is the second, this is a repeat of the first webinar we did last week, and there were so many people who wanted to participate, and so I'm very grateful to Eileen and Mary Beth for agreeing to do this a second time. For folks who are not familiar with the Commission, please visit our website, which is I'll put it in the chat, it's www.massgrg.com. We've been posting newsletters with some information for grandparents and relative caregivers that might be helpful for folks during this COVID-19 pandemic, as well as other good information and resources. So I will put that in the chat. And I'm looking forward to today. Thank you again, ladies.
Thank you.
Of course.
As I said, my name is Eileen Sandberg. I work at the Federation. I basically have two roles at the Federation. The first is I coordinate the Pathways for Parents program. And in doing that, I support different organizations, including the Family Resource Centers and the Commission on Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. So the next slide is going to show you my information. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or issues around special education that we might be able to be helpful with. I'm not a clinician. I am not a psychologist. I am a parent who became a special education advocate and then became a special education trainer. And the other half of my job is that I work with Mary Beth on the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center for Special Education Surrogate Parents. And as part of that role, I am able to participate in doing trainings about developmental childhood trauma, which is Mary Beth's area of specialty. So I basically learn from her.
Good morning, everybody. As Eileen said, I'm Mary Beth Landy. I am with the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center as a training and support specialist. Yes, all of that fits on my business card. At the Federation for Children with Special Needs. As Eileen stated, I am also not a clinician. I consider myself a homebred clinician. I am the parent of two daughters adopted through DCF, biological sisters. And that's how I developed my trauma experience, was having lived it as a parent. So I believe we all develop our own sense of PTSD from this experience, but thank you, Eileen, for asking me to join you this morning. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you for being willing to. Mary Beth is our trauma and developmental childhood trauma in particular resource at the Federation. And I also want to say that I have 5 kids, all of whom at one point have been on IEPs. My oldest 2 kids we adopted in Romania, and they had experienced severe neglect and had a lot of the outcomes from that trauma that we now know are more typical, and the experience of raising them was also pretty traumatic for my other 3 children. My youngest, but the newest to join the family, my second youngest, is my daughter, who came into our family through a kinship adoption. So we have a whole range of ways people got into our family and a whole range of traumas that we dealt with. So it's kind of lived experience for us. Okay, why don't we get started? That's my card information. You are all going to get these slides. They're going to be emailed to you, and we're also going to send you a list of resources that I think should be very helpful. Okay, so our agenda today is to talk first about what is anxiety, how does our body react to stress, fear, anxiety, and then to talk about strategies to help our kids regulate their emotions. And then we'll leave a lot of time for questions and discussion, because I know people probably have a lot that they want to share. Please use the chat function in the Zoom if you want to ask a question. We are recording this webinar, you can post questions anonymously in the chat. You don't have to put your name up on the webinar. Only Mary Beth, myself, and Colleen can be seen on the recording. And please, everybody, mute your microphones, even though we've already muted, just in case. Make sure you're muted. Okay. Mental health in a pandemic. It's uncharted territory. People keep saying unprecedented about this pandemic. Our lives have been disrupted in ways that we did not see coming, we have not experienced before. The future feels uncertain. We know that the COVID-19 virus is an unpredictable disease. We don't know if we're going to be asymptomatic or have mild symptoms or be very, very sick. So we're all in this social isolation that is very stressful. Many of us have had financial impacts that are extremely stressful. It can be very severe for the family. And we're worried. Adults are worried about our health, our loved ones' health, about our children, how we help our children handle the stress, what's going to happen to our children if something happens to us. Children, I say children, I mean grandchildren too. The children we care for. And all of us, children included, have our routines disrupted, and that's hard. Working from home is harder than I thought it would be. And then there's grief. I mean, we all have grief for things that we're not able to go forward with, like high school and college seniors not having graduation, all the things we had planned that we would like to do that we're not going to be able to do. And some of us also have grief from losing people to COVID-19. That's happened to me. A close friend of mine passed away from the COVID-19 virus, and it flattened me. So there's a lot for us to deal with. Okay, Kaiser Family Foundation did a survey that came out last week, so it's way out of date, given how fast things are moving. But they said that 45% of Americans feel that the worry, I misspelled corona, the worry or stress of the coronavirus has an impact on their mental health. I'm not sure what's going on with the other 55%, but you know, good luck. I think most of us are worried and are impacted. 96% of people who answer the survey are social distancing or sheltering in place. So we're going through a lot together, but as they say, together alone. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety. Anxiety can be described as an emotion characterized by feelings or tension of worried or worried thought. There are several forms of anxiety. I'm not going to go through them all, but I gave you resources on the resource sheet where if you want to look up different kinds, you can. Occasional anxiety is not only a normal part of our lives, it can be protective. If we're worried about something, we may take actions that protect us. We're washing our hands a lot because we're worried about COVID, and that can be a reasonable response. But if we're washing our hands all the time, we're constantly putting on Purell until our skin is peeling, that's taking it a step farther.
And I would also add in here, just as a jump, is that anxiety actually not only is a normal part of life, but a healthy part of life. If a child is not a little bit anxious about how well they'll do on their tests, they're less likely to study. So that there is a normal and productive, not just protective, but a productive aspect to a mild level of anxiety that we all, if you want to call it worry, possibly instead of anxiety, but it is the same with anger can be a very motivating factor in a normal response. It's when we've all seen the explosive response that is the problem. So I apologize just for jumping in there, but
no, don't apologize. Jump in.
Okay.
Anytime, please. We know that many people have profound anxiety, even when we're in the typical non-coronavirus life. I wrote normal, but I'm not crazy about that word. I always tell my kids normal is the setting on the dryer. But I think that, I mean, the research that we have on how common anxiety is all based on before this period of pandemic. And my intuition is that it's much worse now. So how common is it? About a third of adults will experience an anxiety disorder, which means that it's bad enough to interfere with their life and they're seeking help for it in their lifetime. About 19% of adults and about 7% of children have diagnosed anxiety within the past year, and that is pre-COVID-19. And many more people, I would venture almost all people have bouts of anxiety, especially in stressful circumstances like this. Mary Beth, any?
I would also add too that I actually think that the percentages of children with diagnosed anxiety is underdiagnosed. I find it, I specialize in working in special education with children with mental health issues. And I find it quite common when in an IEP meeting to find out that a student is not necessarily understood. Their anxiety is not necessarily understood by the professionals who work with them. For example, we talk about some in a next slide about what anxiety looks like, but anxiety looks different in many different kids. And one of the stories that really sticks out for me with my youngest when she was in high school, when switching schools, you always have about a month and a half time frame before the school will reconvene a team meeting in order to discuss the IEP once they have a chance to know the student. And one of the teachers had talked about my daughter as being quiet, not saying anything, wish she would open up more in the classroom, just keeps to herself. And I literally turned to the teacher and said, "Have you met my daughter?" Because that was not the description. My daughter put the H in ADHD and talked nonstop. And so when that is how she expresses her anxiety, is to kind of turn internally. So it was not the typical signs of anxiety that people were looking at. So I think sometimes that number is much lower because I don't think people have a broad spectrum of what anxiety looks like in different children.
Yeah.
So I would say that percentage is probably much higher.
Yes.
And many mental health diagnoses people do not seek out help as often as they should. So I think it's an understated percentage.
Yeah, and even in the percentages that we see in the published research, women report more anxiety than men. Do women have more anxiety? We don't know. Or is it that men are reluctant to report it?
Or think they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
They're just supposed to bear that.
Okay. I put up a description of one form of anxiety, which is generalized anxiety, because I think if we read through it, it can really resonate with what we're going through now. And this is the clinical version, the clinical diagnosis. And I'm not saying that everybody has a clinical diagnosis at this point, but listen to this. Excessive anxiety and worry about, oops, I can't see this over my screen. No, one moment, sorry. About events or activities such as work or school performance that occur more days than not, at least for 6 months. Now, this part really resonates with me. People with generalized anxiety disorder find it difficult to control their worry, which may cause impairment in social, occupational, and other areas of functioning. I think we're living in an anxiety environment now with this pandemic that is not like what we've seen before. And a lot of people are worried a lot of the time and having trouble letting go of thoughts about the pandemic. So these things can happen to people in stressful times, not necessarily at the clinical level, but it's definitely still important to pay attention to.
And I think
Okay.
also people can be triggered in areas that they had not ever been triggered in before. I've experienced driving down the street, and to see someone else driving with a mask on and gloves on really does take me out of whatever I was doing at the time. It takes me to a place of anxiety, reminding me we are at a different crossroads than at least our generation has ever experienced before.
Yeah.
And it is, to me, it's a very surreal experience. But I find that it is triggering in talking with my kids, the fact that they are sheltered in place is extremely triggering time for them. It takes them back to times when they were left home alone and told not to answer the door, and their parents were gone for days, things that I would not necessarily have put together. But as my oldest daughter said, who would have thought these things would have brought all this back up again? So
Yeah, and I think that the general feeling of not being in control and not knowing where this is going, the uncertainty, can trigger all kinds of memories and past emotions.
Yes.
Common symptoms of anxiety that we see in kids and adults can be episodes of sudden, unexpected, intense fear. They can have symptoms like trouble breathing, feeling dizzy, being sweaty or shaky. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works in our brains in a moment. Anxiety can make children irritable and angry, and they can act out in ways that don't necessarily seem like what we might think of as stereotypical anxiety. Anxiety symptoms can include trouble sleeping, and just anecdotally, so many people I know are having trouble sleeping these days. Physical symptoms like fatigues, headaches, and stomach aches. Those are what we call somatic symptoms. It's the body reacting to stress. And it's absolutely real when it happens. If it's happening to children and you're hearing about constantly having a stomach ache or a headache, the series of stress hormones that we're going to talk about in a minute can trigger things that cause real stomach aches, like increase in stomach aches, things like that. And children may be very afraid when they're away from you, and they may be more worried, sorry, about the future and about bad things happening than they were before. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the brain. I promise I won't dig too much into what's in the brain. I want to talk a little bit about how our brain reacts in a dangerous situation. For example, suppose you're hiking in the woods and it's a beautiful day and then a bear walks into your path. What happens when you perceive something that's dangerous is the brain sends a signal to the part of your brain called the amygdala. It's one of the more primitive parts of the brain, and it's what really reacts to stress with what we think of as the fight, flight, and what we call freeze or flock, which are other things that the brain can do. Those reactions can happen. And then between the amygdala, the hippocampus, and other parts of the brain, there's a cascade of hormones that goes on. And one interacts with the other. It's very complex. But what it produces is a surge of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol into the body. If you've ever been in a situation where you've been driving and you have a near miss, like somebody cuts you off and you almost hit them, you know that feeling of just that intense, and then afterwards a little shaky. And you're not going to stop and balance your checkbook at that point. Your brain is not thinking in a particularly rational cognitive way. As I said, these are part of the fight, flight, freeze, or flock responses. We often hear about fighting in flight. You might want to, grab a stick and attack that bear, or run like heck, and you're not supposed to run from the bear. And what you're supposed to do is freeze. And that can be a reaction that children have too in very stressful environments where they might not be talking, or they might look kind of deer in the headlights. And flocking is about safety in numbers. It's about people who find other people who understand their feelings about the world not being a safe place. And we see that a lot with kids who've experienced trauma. Things that go on while this cascade is happening: your heart rate increases, your pulse and your blood pressure increase. Breathing rate increases, and more oxygen is sent to the brain and to the muscles. Stomach acid increases. Your whole digestive tract basically stops processing, and you get more stomach acid. Blood is sent to the muscles, and glucose is released for energy. So if you've had a real adrenaline rush from an emergency, you feel very strong. I had a situation once with my youngest child. We were kayaking. He was thrown out of the kayak into the current, and I dove in after him, and I felt like, Charles Atlas. I mean, I got that kid out. And afterwards, I was exhausted. So you have this rush that makes you physically able to do stronger things. It's fascinating research on all of this stuff. I mean, there's things like, one of the things is your blood clots faster and better when you're in this situation. Probably because they're thinking the bear is going to bite you and you need to stop bleeding. So.
And if I could just add here, I think that people have gone through and experienced children who have that, particularly after an explosive episode. There are many times when children are suffering from anxiety that they go through an explosive episode and then they go into what I call the hibernation stage,
Mhm.
where they're exhausted and many times can't even recall what it was that caused them to be anxious in the first place or caused them for the exploding, because the cognitive aspects of their brain had actually shut down at that point. So you may find that you've experienced it when students have one of these responses, that they also go through that period of having to collapse to take a nap. And they can wake up from the nap and not remember really cognitively remember the experience. The important thing is, remember, their body remembers the experience as to what the trigger was. And we can talk a little bit more about that, but that gets stored in a separate portion of the brain.
Yeah, that whole cascade of hormones that's going on, one of the things it does is it basically shuts down the prefrontal cortex. And that part of your brain is thinking, it's rational, it's organizing things, and it's some memory. So it can be that if that's shut down, first of all, if a child is having a meltdown or an explosion, you're not going to be able to reason with them. I think everyone who's been through this knows this. In the moment is not the time to try to be rational or impose consequences, because it's not going to work. Their brains are not wired for that.
Yeah, so asking the question of why you did that, not helpful. At least it took me a little while to realize that was not a rational question to ask a child right after the moment had happened, of what happened and why did you do that. So I
When
think
they're
that's
still triggered.
exactly.
We know that in a person who has not experienced a developmental trauma, it can take about 20 minutes for the feelings and the hormonal response to regulate itself. It can take longer for kids who have experienced trauma and adults. It can also be that kids have experienced so much repetitive stress and trauma that their levels of these hormones are higher all the time. And you hear about things like kids who go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. They're not going from 0 to 60. They're going from about 45 to 60, because that's where they're running the whole time in terms of anxiety. So what seems like an overreaction to something simple can just be that their body is wired for this.
Yep, and as we usually use the metaphor, is if you're trying to merge on a highway and you're at a dead stop of 0 and trying to get to 60, it takes you much longer than if you're merging on a highway and you merge on it at 30, 45 miles an hour, you get to 60 much faster. And it doesn't, the important thing to remember is that probably with the children as well as with adults, we don't necessarily know what the trigger is. It's an internal trigger that can happen, and so it's hard to know and watch for the predictors. It takes kind of an investigative methodology of spending, as you know, a lot of time so that you understand the child very well, that you can see when something might be coming. I know that one of the frequent things that used to happen a lot in our house is my girls would be having a good time and laughing, but there was something funny sometimes when their laugh got to be a little too much, and I would seem like the bad guy, but I would put a halt to the horsing around, because I knew it was one step over that line very quickly, and somebody was going to get hurt. It was going to turn from fun laughing into something malicious, or something was going to happen. And that just took years for me to be able to figure out. And that's why we at the Federation really believe that parents are the expert. Parents, grandparents, caretakers are the expert of the children, as opposed to the clinicians, and nothing against clinicians, the clinicians or the teachers or anyone else who works with students for very short periods of time. You really do understand your child much better than anyone else does.
And when I was raising my kids and we didn't have all of this research on the impact of trauma, I mean, a lot of the initial research came out of the Romanian orphans. So I wish I'd known then when I was raising my little Romanian orphans. But I feel like understanding developmental trauma was like putting on a pair of glasses and finally be able to see and focus. and it
Mhm.
dramatically improved my relationship with my children. So that's enough about that. Let's see. So how do we help our kids cope? We can't eliminate all the anxiety. We certainly can't do it these days, but we really can't even in our typical world. But we can help kids learn how to manage their feelings and regulate their emotions. The caregiver needs to remain calm and steady. Easier said than done. You can do something called co-regulation if you're just sitting and holding space with a child, deep breathing together. Even if you're the only one doing the deep regular breathing, it can help the child to get a little bit calmer, to model regulation, basically. We always want to respect our children's feelings and fears, not tell them that it's silly to be afraid of the COVID or anything like that. I always find that children have a remarkable ability to take one and one and make it equal. It's all their fault. So, kids hear rumors, kids think that they did something, they're worried they're going to get sick and cause you to get sick. There's all kinds of things going on in those little heads. So it's good to talk through their worries honestly, and teach your children through your behavior that you believe in their ability to handle the stress, even if they're not doing such a great job right now. Maribel, anything to add?
I completely agree with you on that. I think that the important thing and the hard thing was, the statement about caregivers remaining calm and steady. That is the huge challenge in this.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not that we're asking you to disregard your own feelings. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important, and one of the things we will do in this is do some actual activities that can help bring down your own anxiety level or stress level. My dog is going berserk in front of me, so I apologize. It's the thing about working from home. He is anxious because someone left the house and he can't see them. So I think that it's important that when we go through the activities of some relaxation activities, that you consider incorporating those into your day. And we include activities that you can do that we're not expecting that you can find 15, 20 minutes, 45 minutes to lay down in a meditative state and do some meditation and mindfulness. That's just, as a caregiver in general, let alone during the middle of a pandemic, is almost impossible to do. I actually do meditate, and when the kids were younger, my youngest was calling me and I wasn't responding because I was meditating. And next thing I know, I feel this tapping of her finger on my forehead because she didn't understand what I was doing. So it's not that we're expecting, or saying that that's the only way to remain calm and steady, or to not pay attention to how you're feeling, because they pick up on that. I think it's really important that you do pay attention to your anxiety, how you're feeling, and that you find ways to be able to offload that, if you will, having a strong support network that you can talk with someone else about it. I think that this group is probably a great group to be able to do that. Sometimes you just have to say, you know what, my kid was hangry last night and was driving me insane. We used to have what we called the witching hour, the 2 hours before dinner, when all of a sudden everything falls apart because they get angry and hungry. I think that having somebody else who understands that and goes, I get that, can really make a difference and can help with the ability to remain calm and steady when the child is anxious. So,
oh, I mean, please know that I definitely did not manage to be calm and steady through all of raising my kids. And I do find some of the techniques that we talk about later helpful, but I didn't know them when my kids were little. So this is kind of humorous, but I made up a little prayer that went, God, grant me patience with my kid. I love him no matter what he did. And my kids knew that if they heard me mumbling, they better run. Okay. Okay, I love this expression, calm is a superpower. And the reason I say that is it helps in so many ways if you can maintain a steady demeanor with kids, especially when they're having a hard time. I think calm is contagious. I mean, I had an experience many years ago when I was on a plane that had to make an emergency landing. And the plane, everything turned out fine. There was a faulty light and not anything wrong with the actual plane, but it was really frightening. And as we were getting off, I said to the flight attendant, "You were amazing, all of you." They were so calm and they were focused and their faces were calm. They practiced this, they trained for this. And I said, "You were so amazing." And she said, "I was praying every scene I could think of." But she knew calm is contagious. If the flight attendants lose it, you're not going to have a good chance to evacuate a plane. So it's worth something to work toward, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, there's no shame in not being calm some of the time. None of us is perfect. We're human beings. It can really help us help our kids. Okay, so other ways to help our kids cope. Consistent routines and bedtimes. That can be really challenging when they think they're on one long school vacation.
They hate structure and routines, but they thrive on it. And I think that most people who have kids living with them that are have trauma backgrounds or mental health issues find that the kids will fight the structure and the routines. But I'm not sure with you, Eileen, but vacations were really difficult. School vacations were a very challenging time for us because the kids thought, oh, routines are out the window. I can stay up as long as I want. And it really, you know, them staying up late, their bedtimes being off really makes it difficult for them to get up early, that they're overly tired. I know that a lot of times during this, you know, the off times when they're out of school, the routine may feel like, why be concerned about that? You know, let them stay up later. They really need the sleep. And I think sleep is played and underappreciated in our society. We always think we can fit more things in, but the sleep, one of the other things that the stress hormones do actually is mess up the sleep patterns for children. It makes it harder for them to go to sleep. It makes it harder for them to stay asleep, particularly if they have experiences with night terrors and things like that. That's where the appearance of fatigue many times comes in. There are actually sometimes kids that are diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome when in fact it's just they have higher levels of cortisol in their system. That the routines of we get up at this time, we have breakfast at this time, we do whatever routines you have determined that need to happen, and possibly having a loose chart of, you know, at 2 in the afternoon, we're going to do something physical. We're going to go out and have a walk, or we're going to play with the dog, or we're going to do something to that point, is really important. I don't think we can stress that enough.
Yeah. I'm trying to keep kids on as healthy a diet as you can is important. Again, the whole vacation syndrome. And plus, we're not going to the grocery store every day, so we may be making meals out of whatever we got around. But as much as we can keep them eating healthy food, that's really helpful to their bodies. We want to be able to connect virtually with our family and our friends in whatever ways are working for you. If it's phone, if it's video chats. I personally find it very reassuring to have what my sister calls proof of life. We have a family video chat every week where I get to look at their faces, see they look okay. So
we've done.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. We've done video dinners with friends so that they can have some time to which they can see their friends. I know that one of our coworkers has done that with lunchtime with her kids' class. And I would say, you know, technology is definitely being used a lot now, and it's not everyone's strength. We happen to use Zoom on a regular basis. So we're very familiar with how it works. I would say if you want to and are not familiar with technology and how to work, say, a Zoom platform or a Google Friend, reach out to Eileen or myself, or we can set it up with anyone at the Federation who'd be happy to show you how to go through and set up a Zoom meeting, a Google group, that sort of thing. Even if you're just trying to connect with family, don't worry about, being embarrassed about saying that you don't know how to do it. I think this is the time to ask for help.
Yeah, and everybody's learning. Regular exercise and getting outdoors. Can't stress that enough. The kids have to move. They have to get out there. It's great for their bodies in terms of dealing with stress hormones. It's great for dealing with, anxiety, not gaining lots of weight like I am in the last 6 weeks. One thing that I do with my kids is we have dance parties sometimes. I don't care how goofy I look. When they got to be preteens and teenagers, I stopped being cool when I dance, but I don't really care. So we put on the music and we dance. We talk a lot about limiting access to the news. That's really important. Kids hear things and rumors, and frankly, the news that we get seems to change every day. So it's really
and they
hard
get their
for them.
news through social media, so I would include that in that statement as well.
Absolutely, and there's not necessarily a filter on how much of that is true.
Correct.
So, and then connecting through humor. For my family, this is an incredibly strong part of our bond, is that we just have a lot of goofy jokes together. We went on a truly horrible camping trip years ago, and we developed a family song. And the family song is entitled, "It's Always Freaking Something." So, and when we get in a bad situation, somebody will say, "I think this calls for a song." It's just our little in-joke. But whatever, connects you in terms of hobbies, humor, things that you share, it's a great time to put some emphasis on that.
I think it speaks to creativity. That was a great way to deal with the kids' frustration. Your family song about what could happen. I think it can be, if you've got you or yourself are creative about things, you can have somebody come up and write a little jingle about what's going on in the household that you can laugh about. I have a friend of mine who writes humor music, and we were on a sort of retreat. It's a weekend away for a community that I belong to, and it's called Ferry Beach is the location. So I went around asking everyone what was it that they liked so much about going on this excursion, and he put it in a song, and he tried to make it rhyme. So there's not much that rhymes with beach, except Ferry Beach is a peach. Oh, what a peach, Ferry Beach was his.
Don't get a leech.
Yeah, exactly. And so everything rhymed off of that, and it changes every year. He still does the same song, but he changes every year. And to this day, this is still how I remember him, is by his little jingle. But it's just goofy. It makes people laugh, and it allows creativity amongst the kids. So,
and when it's within the family, it's a connection that you share.
Exactly.
But don't expect your preteens and teenagers to admit that.
Exactly. They'll get into it, but they won't admit they like it.
Okay. We're going to do some strategies on how to regulate the body's response to stress. We're probably going to run out of time for doing all of the ones that we had planned, but we're going to start with at least one, and you will have all of these strategies in your resource list. One thing that I have to say is this isn't one size fits all or fits a particular family. Some of these may seem goofy to you or not right for your family. It's good to have a toolbox of techniques, and some of them that we put in are very quick and very accessible. For example, when you're out in a community and a kid is melting down, or with little children where they're not going to spend 10 minutes on a mindful breathing thing when they're having a hard time. So it's also important that you teach them and practice them with your children when they're not upset. Don't say teaching this for a meltdown, because it's not going to happen. But I will tell you, with my son, over the years, I have worked with one of my kids is on the autism spectrum. He has sometimes very bad meltdowns, sometimes in public. And we have worked on different techniques to help him regulate. And, you know, it takes time, but it's made a big difference. Okay. So what is mindfulness or being grounded? I always joke that when I was a kid, being grounded meant you stayed out too late and you don't get the car. But what it really means is paying attention purposefully and non-judgmentally to your experience right where you are, being in the now, if that makes sense. We're going to go through some examples of breathing and mindfulness techniques to help kids regulate their emotions. And these are all, as I said, in the resource document. Mary Beth. Oh, I'm going to do visualization quickly because
Okay,
most
you
people
go
are
ahead.
familiar with it. Basically, a visualization can be as simple as imagining yourself in a calm, peaceful place as vividly as you can. This can be part of a meditation practice, or it can just be, if anybody's seen Happy Gilmore, you go into your happy place. So an example would be visualizing yourself lying on a beach with the waves lapping and the sun's on you, and just how you would feel, all the feelings and smells and sounds around you, and the tension draining out of your body. I think this is really a practical thing that people can do anywhere if you just need a moment, if you feel your tension escalating. So, visualization is a simple place to start. Sensory techniques can be very simple and helpful to kids, and these can be very effective even when they're melting down. Holding an ice cube briefly, don't let them do the ice cube challenge thing where they hold it for too long. My daughter managed to give herself a second-degree burn doing that. But just hold the ice cube and focus on how it feels. Ice cubes can be a real sort of a break point between an attack of tension or anxiety. Similarly, other kinds of sensory experiences like taking a hot or cool shower, taking a bath, using a weighted blanket or several regular blankets. See, what my son's bedroom, you would never be able to find him under all the covers. Smells can be helpful. A lot of people like lavender and find that calming and soothing. One of my kids loves dryer sheets and associates the smell of gain with me. So, go figure. Do you have anything you want to add, Mary Beth?
No, I think those are great. I think it's important that when working with scents, that you have the student child pick out a scent that is familiar for them. Because I know that there's some scents can be very triggering for kids,
point.
so that they should be the ones picking this out. And on the weighted blankets, if you don't have them, you said several blankets, make sure the first blanket is like the cuddliest, they're binky, as they like to call it in our house. My 24-year-old still has her childhood blankie that she had when she was, it's only about this I can't even show you now. It's about this big because it's so frayed, but let them, you know, have things that are comfortable to them. For some kids, it's not necessarily a weighted blanket, but they take all of their stuffed animals and bury themselves in their stuffed animals, and it gives that same sensation.
My son used to like being sandwiched in between two beanbag chairs. You know, with his head out, obviously, so he could breathe, but he loved the whole body pressure. But it's very individual, you're right, because you don't know what's going to be triggering necessarily, so we can't say it's one size fits all. Okay, I have a suggestion, Mary Beth. Do you have the alternate nostril breathing thing? And could you read it while I demonstrate it?
I don't have it because I just usually do it.
Okay, well, can you just say it while I demonstrate it? I have a hard time saying it and doing it at the same time.
Well, because you're busy breathing. So what you want to do is take your hand and place it in this position so that your thumb and your pinky are stretched out. And as you notice, what Eileen is going to do is going to use her fingers to close off one side of her one nostril while leaving the other one open so that you can still breathe. And you want to also do this with your mouth closed. Because you're going to breathe specifically through your nose. And this is easy, something that's kind of fun and easy for kids to be able to do too. So you'll start by whichever nose that you've closed off. And since we're kind of opposite each other, I'm not sure if it's Eileen's right or left, so I'm not going to even.
It doesn't matter, it's my right.
Thank you. And what you're going to do is breathe through the open nostril as slowly and deeply and as much air as you possibly can with that. And then you are going to switch nostrils, hold your breath and switch nostrils, and then breathe out through the other nostril. And you will just continue doing this for about 6 times each, trying to breathe in as slowly as you can so you get the deepest breath that you can. So why don't you give it a try? And that is alternate nostril breathing. It may not necessarily be something you want to do on Zoom in the middle of a business meeting when you need to practice, or your staff meeting, unless you can get everyone to do it together. It's great. So some techniques we have, so we're going to offer you, that can be done without anyone else knowing that you're doing it, and some techniques you want to do. That's one that I would do with my child together. It's similar to when she used to stop saying she was going to stop breathing, and I would say, okay, then I'm going to stop breathing too, until she yelled, no, breathe, you're turning purple. I'm like, thank God. So it's definitely something to be done with, particularly while you're teaching the technique.
I have never found when somebody is having a hard time, whether they're a child or an adult, including me, that it's very helpful to say, calm down, or take a breath. It tends not to be something they're going to internalize and do. But one thing that we've used that I wish I knew about when my kids were little is bubble fluid. If you take a bubble fluid thing and blow, it turns out you really can't blow the biggest bubble possible or a whole lot of bubbles without taking a deep breath. And since people of all ages really enjoy bubble fluid, it's something that can work even sometimes with older kids. And if you're thinking, I don't have any bubble fluid in the house, we have a recipe for homemade bubble fluid. We actually have 2 recipes that are on that resource sheet I talked about. And it can be kind of fun to do a little scavenger hunt and try to find things that can work as a bubble wand. Safety scissors, you can blow double bubbles. It's kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
We give you all those instructions.
It's something that my children's therapists, I wondered why when they came out of therapy, they were always blowing bubbles. And ask them to blow as many bubbles as they can, or the largest bubble they can, and continue to do that for like 6 or 7 times. And what it's doing is actually forcing them to deep breathe while they don't realize they're doing it. So it's a great technique to use, particularly for younger kids that you would have difficulty trying to get them to do something like an alternative breathing, nasal breathing.
I'm going to suggest that we go through one more slide with some quick techniques for regulation that can work for kids of all ages. And then maybe we'll go to questions and
Sure.
see how we're doing time-wise. Okay. Pushing palms. Hold your palms together and push for 5 to 10 seconds. Might look like you're praying. Belly hug. Kids can do this. Little kids can do this. You can give yourself a big hug. Squeeze yourself. 5-second wall push. You lean yourself against the wall with your hands on the wall and your feet a few feet back, and you lean in and push as hard as you can. I had my kid doing the wall push at the Washington Monument one time when he was melting down because the line was long. It's very effective in lots of situations. There's Superman pose, where you lie on your belly on the floor and extend your arms in front of you, and at the same time extend your legs and hold them out straight, and just hold that pose and pretend you're Superman. Kids can do this, even little kids. Any more comments, Maribel?
No, I think the main thing that all of these are doing is that they're working off that adrenaline and cortisol stress levels that they have in their system. So it's stabilizing them by bringing down those levels, because they have to be worked off somehow. Otherwise, they just remain in the body. And for our kids, they don't. Like we said, they don't necessarily go back down to that baseline. This will help them lower their baseline.
Yeah. We really want you to know that the Federation for Children with Special Needs is here to support you, and not just with special education, but with all kinds of things around our kids' needs.